That was why Brandon wanted to collaborate, because he knew I could bring that to the writing. Music touches the soul in a way fiction can't. It's certainly grounded in a very, what I think is original Sanderson style magic system, unlike anything that at least I've ever read. Brandon, I remember at one point, close to the end of the book, he goes, I'm glad you pushed on this because this is much better than where we started.
Welcome. I am so excited today to be joined by Peter Orullian, who co-wrote with Brandon Sanderson a new book coming out, actually just came out yesterday, called Songs of the Dead, which is a really cool contemporary fantasy that follows a character named Jack Solomon in kind of like an alternative London, and there's a lot of music history and a lot dealing with personal past. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited to talk about the book.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This will be fun.
So you co-wrote a book with Brandon Sanderson. That
I did, yeah.
Is kind of a big deal. How did that come about? What happened? How did you get tapped for a project like that?
Well, there's a writers conference in Provo, Utah that for a long time was Brandon's home conference called LTUE. And I'm from Salt Lake, so I started to fly down to attend that conference. And over time, we were on fiction panels together, and then, we would be at dinners together, and a friendship just evolved. Brandon, of course, had Wheel of Time, and he had a lot of things going on. I was doing an epic fantasy trilogy for Tor, and at some point, I was looking for an opportunity to catalyze my career. I had done some novelization work for big progressive metal bands, because I've always combined my music and my writing in one way or another. And I had the notion of doing a collaboration. And I knew Brandon, so I didn't really expect him to say yes, the altitude of his career. But I sent the email anyway. And I was sitting at home one night, and I got this call, and it was Brandon. And he said, earlier in my career, this really wouldn't have been something I would have done, but I'm in a place that I can consider these things. And he said, I have a project that might be perfect. And he told me about a project he had called Death by Pizza. And a lot of Brandon's fans will have heard about Death by Pizza for years. It was kind of a more comic architecture that he had. It's an American metal singer living in London, shows up to deliver a pizza, gets shot and dies and wakes up as a necromancer. And so kind of tongue-in-cheek a little bit, but he'd never been able to get it right. And that had a lot to do with the fact that while he cast a character who was a heavy metal singer, he knew that the metal culture is often stereotyped, but he'd never really been a part of it. So he couldn't bring the right kind of authenticity to it. So when I hit him up about this, he had blurbed some of my fantasy books for Tor, so I knew I could write. And then he knew I was part of heavy metal culture. I'd toured, a touring musician, and I'd written metal records, and I'd done these Dream Theater projects. Dream Theater's a Grammy award-winning progressive metal band, so he knew who they were. So the pieces just fit. And so we kind of made agreement that we'd get rolling on this new project together.
Oh my gosh. That's exciting.
Yeah.
So you've known Brandon then since he was writing Wheel of Time, so it's been a while.
Yes.
So that makes sense that it took years in the making maybe for this to come about.
Yeah, it was not a cold call, so to speak. Yeah. Yeah, he already had some confidence, I think, that he knew I could do the writing and knew enough about me that I could bring. When Brandon collaborates, he typically collaborates with somebody who brings a strength to the project that he doesn't have, because he could collaborate with anybody.
Right. So
it's usually like it fills a gap that he thinks the project needs. This just the fate hit at the right time for both of us.
Yeah, because I know when he did Skyward with Jancy, it was because he wanted to bring someone a little bit more experience with YA.
Yep.
So he wanted to bring someone more experience with metal.
Yep.
I know you toured at some big music festivals in Germany. Tell me about your music history. I don't know a lot about the metal community, so inform me. I most of it I learned from reading Songs of the Dead. Okay, so fill me in.
Well, I mean, music. I grew up in a musical family. When I was a kid, my mom would put me on the piano bench to sing at Christmas parties.
Okay.
And so it was just...
Was that scarring or was it okay?
No, I loved it.
Okay.
I loved it. I mean, I'm that person that I'm in the supermarket and I'm paying more attention to the muzak that they're playing over the intercom.
It's not usually good music, right?
Sometimes it's not so bad. They're interesting renditions. But I'll stop the person, whoever I'm with, and I'll say, "What's that song?" Oh yeah. It draws my attention wherever I'm at. And I'm a fan of all kinds of music. So rock and metal are big for me, but I actively listen to jazz and classical. I'm a big fan of show tunes. I love Broadway.
Okay.
So my musical tastes are really diverse. But when it comes to writing and performing, it's usually rock or metal, like guitar-centered music. And coming out of high school, I began to audition for groups. I got into different bands. This was in Salt Lake still. And then I moved here to the Pacific Northwest where the industry was in the 90s because I thought, we could catch on. I studied with a vocal trainer by the name of David Kyle in West Seattle. He trained guys like Jeff Tate from Queensryche, Lane Staley from Alice in Chains, Ann Wilson from Heart. Like he had big voices in his stable. So I learned how to use my voice with a classical technique, and that led me into very athletic rock and metal singing. Like a lot of those, the best of those vocalists, like they've done real vocal training to be able to sing that work. And that brought me to Europe on various tours with groups, singing some of those festivals in Germany in particular, where, that was the thrill of my life. This is why I can't ever separate music and writing, is they satisfy different parts of my creative mind and my ego.
Yeah, okay.
Because there's nothing like singing for 5,000 fans
say.
who are singing every word with you. It's really hard to describe that feeling. Like you feel like it's such a rush. So I keep chasing that, and I'll continue to chase it. And in service of that, I founded my own group, which is called Symphony North. It's a symphonic rock band, a lot like Trans-Siberian Orchestra. In all of my writing, with very few exceptions, music plays a critical role, just like it does here. Even in my first fantasy trilogy with Tor, like one of the main features is a music magic system I built. In all of my music, I'm telling stories. And so Symphony North, the first album I wrote, is a concept album that tells this original Christmas story. And so we've toured that production, and it's a curtain-to-curtain story that tells, this very heartfelt story. Most of the fans of it call it It's a Wonderful Life for a New Generation. That's my musical life now. When I'm not writing, I'm composing for Symphony North and working on touring productions that we do.
Now, I love the idea of if the music's so important to your work, would this be something like you would publish the book and it would come with music to experience while you read it, or the music of it? How does that, you envision that going together? Or would it be like the music's a different way to experience the story?
It would be both. So I do have the notion of having audiobooks that would use musical themes from the touring production and the record that would be part of the musical landscape and audio design in the audiobook, which I think would be really cool. Mm-hmm. We produced a version of the show that we put on YouTube that is all of the music. And with the music, there are some instrumentals, but most of them have lyrics. And so they carry the narrative motion forward. But then we have a narrator that comes in to do interstitials to sort of connect some of the story motion. So when you see the show live, there's a narrator that comes in between most of the songs to help connect it. And it's really cool because he's this avuncular figure that comes forward and breaks that fourth wall and takes you into his confidence and then shares a little bit of how you get from this song to this song. Mm. And so it's this night of it's really a lot like what Handel did with his oratorios. Instead of big set pieces for opera, he would have the vocalist there basically creating the scene with the vocal. Mm. And we do much the same. Obviously, the instrumentation is different. Although with Symphony North, the way I compose, there's a lot of strings, there's a lot of horns and woodwinds. It's a very symphonic rock group. Because I love the idea that when people come in, they're thrilled, but they're edified. Like at this point, sort of my creative life, I love like rock and metal music that's just a thrill for the tune. But the stuff I want to create, I want people to come and have this experience where they're at the end of the night, they're moved. And so in my music life, and all of this other stuff that's not going to be these books, that's what I do. And it's thrilling to be able to bring that stuff to life. I mean, it gets me out of the bed in the morning.
I mean, I would say that even the lyrics and music you wrote for Songs of the Dead are meant to be edifying and uplifting. I mean, there's a song in the novel that's kind of the core emotional storyline, I would say, without spoilers. How was it writing that song? And I'm curious about if you have like instrumentation for that song in your head, because I'm not a musician, so whenever I read these songs, I always think, man, I wish they'd give me like a CD so I could hear what I'm supposed to be hearing.
Yeah. So the answer is I did write the song.
Okay.
And an interesting that happened a couple of months ago, Simon & Schuster's, the producer that was doing the audiobook, sent me an email and said, is there any chance you wrote this song? And I said, I did. And they said, how would you feel about if at this moment where we actually hear the lyrics of the refrain, it's sung? And I said, okay, as long as it's done well.
Yeah,
right?
as long as it's done right.
So I recorded the melody and I sent it to the narrator, who's Luke Daniels, and he's an amazing narrator. But Luke would, I think, fairly say he's not a musician. And so he sent back his effort at it. And the good news is there's software now to help with pitch correction. So I said, the other part of it is when this is sung in the book, it's Jack and his friend Chewy. And it's important that they're singing together. So what ended up happening is I recorded the vocal. We used Luke's vocal and just tuned it a little bit. And then we did a little bit of adjustment for some harmony. And so when people get to that part of the audiobook, they're going to hear the actual melody a cappella. And then I was talking to Isaac, from Dragonsteel. I was down there a couple of weeks ago, and he asked me about the song. And he said, have you recorded it? I said, I actually haven't recorded it with full instrumentation. He says, you need to do that. So later this summer, after the book tour and all of that other stuff, I'm going to do that.
Oh.
But kind of to
release it?
And release it, okay. Yeah. We'll put it up on Spotify
good.
and YouTube and all the places. Unfortunately, I know a lot of musicians who will help me record it because I can play keys a little bit, but I'm a composer and a vocalist. But I have so many friends that play guitar and all of the other stuff. But there are going to be a lot of opportunities for product packaging for Symphony North, where you could buy the book and get the CD and whatever else, and that could happen with this series too. If I leaned in more to writing more music that went with it, it could make some sense. It's all time, because if I'm going to write music, I want it to be really good music. And my editor's given me a deadline for book 2, so we'll see.
That's an interesting question. Is it hard to creatively balance writing a novel and writing like songs or composing music? Does it take the same creative juice, or can you find you can do them back to back and it's refreshing? Does that make sense?
Yeah, for me, the rhythm I was in when I was writing the first draft of this and working on the Symphony North record is I'd get up in the morning, I would write fiction until just after noon, and then in the afternoon I would compose. And that worked really well for me. They're like palate cleansers. Okay. So going back to the other one feels good after, spending some time over here. And I'm just always going to be a creature that needs to do both. I won't ever choose. But I can't imagine fiction I will ever write where music will not be a substantive part of the story, in the same way I can't imagine any music I write won't ever be telling stories. It's just, it's not even deliberate on my part. It's just instinct.
Yeah, because you said that you've grew up in a musical family. You've had music since you were young. What about fiction writing? Did that happen at a similar time, or did it come later? So
when I was a kid, my little sister and I were several years separated from the rest of the family. There were 6 total kids. And so we were like our own little second family almost. And we shared a bedroom. And I remember as kids, I would just extemporaneously tell her stories at night. So I was always doing that. And also singing, like all the time. Sometimes when it was not so appropriate, like in church and stuff, when it wasn't actually time to sing a hymn, I was singing and had to be shushed. What happened for me was I graduated high school. I went to Hawaii with some buddies on my senior trip, and I was in the curio shop in the Honolulu airport on my way back. And I'd always had this instinct I wanted to put something to paper, but just hadn't really done it. I'd done some journaling and stuff like that. I also, as a kid, was very sort of, I don't know if esoteric's the right word, but I would listen to music and I would free write what I felt. There was a group, I don't know if you remember, called Mannheim Steamroller, and they've got this really great album series called Fresh Air. I was in the Honolulu airport and I needed something to read on the flight back. And so while I had done a little bit of writing, the free writing I would do to the Mannheim Steamroller records, right? Thinking I was like so inspired none of it made a lot of sense, but it was very emotional.
Yeah.
I picked up Stephen King's Night Shift, which is a collection of his. And it kind of changed things for me. I still love, it's almost like a totem for me, that book. And as soon as I got home, I read the whole thing on the flight. I began to write short stories. And that's when I started to get serious about actually trying to do something. And that just grew. Then I got an honors degree at the University of Utah. And for that, I needed to write a novel. That was, my thesis. And what's interesting, I wrote a vampire novel. The conceit was that vampirism is coded for in DNA. And what's interesting is about a year after I completed that, and it wasn't good enough to publish, Dan Simmons, who's my favorite writer, actually published a novel called Children of the Night with much the same conceit.
Oh.
Yeah, so I felt like, at least my idea was good.
What year was that? Was this during Twilight era?
Yeah, it was 93, 94.
Okay, so you were way before.
Way before you guys. Yeah, way before you guys.
Way before that happened.
But and then the next thing is when I moved here pursuing the big music dream, I thought it's time for me to try and write a deliberate fantasy. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I did. I wrote a fantasy. Ultimately, that's what Tor bought. It's circuitous to get there, but that's the book that Tor bought.
Oh. Yeah. So that's interesting. That's been part of the DNA the whole time, because it feels like everything you're saying is really put into Songs of the Dead, and how music is so integral to Jack, our main character's life. And so it started as Death by Pizza, something very silly. I was one of the people who knew about that. This ultimate product is not, in my opinion, very silly at all. It definitely has a much darker, serious tone.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that transition, like how you and Brandon worked together and when you guys kind of realized it was going maybe in a little bit of a different direction.
Yeah, so Brandon had two ideas that were, one, he wanted to treat the metal community thoughtfully and authentically. Because he knew intellectually that they often get stereotyped and it's drawn up as cliches, much like Spinal Tap. And I love Spinal Tap, but it is like all the cliches about what rock and metal life is. He also had this notion that, could be somewhat comical. So as an example, there would be characters, there were different factions that were sort of drawn from different areas of the world. Like one was from Egypt, and they were called the Brotherhood of Heka. And they're still in the book, but they would be in these costumes that really leaned in on almost over the top caricature of what you'd expect someone from Egypt to wear. Mm. And so one of the things that happened is there was a character that I had in the writing. I made a story choice because I was doing the line by after we built the World Bible and the story architecture for the series and the trilogy and the outline for book one. I was doing line by line writing, and then we would have weekly calls to talk about the story choices and how things were going. And I'd troubleshoot with him places I was at with the story. And I made a choice to have a character die. And that was tonally different than, typically, than like something that was just played for laughs. And the other part of it is that Brandon had this notion that the character's main flaw was that he could never finish anything. Like he couldn't finish a song, he couldn't finish the dishes, just wasn't a finisher. And my brain kept saying, okay, but that stems from something. Like, why is he not finishing stuff? And so as we started working on these story questions, what resulted was what Brandon calls a much more sincere book. Because at one point, I think I said to him, look, if we don't want to just play this if we don't want this to be a stereotype and just like laughs with a bunch of characters who are metal heads, then it's going to be a much more thoughtful novel, and it's going to be more authentic to these people, which is what you wanted to do. And what's good is that when we found what Jack's reason was for not finishing things, which is darker.
Yeah.
Brandon, I remember at one point, close to the end of the book, he goes, I'm glad you pushed on this because this is much better than where we started. So I think it could have been fun if it was just played for laughs, but then it would have probably read like a Spinal Tap book. Mm-hmm. That book I still want to read, maybe I'll even write that at some point. But, one of the themes, I don't write from theme, but I always find theme along the way. And I think one of the themes here is found family.
100%.
And I think people in the fantasy and science fiction community understand that concept a lot because I think they feel it, and they're a part of it. And so it was interesting that we wanted to kind of show that for a group of people who are equally sort of stereotyped, right? And I think we made the right choice with this book to do that because Jack really finds his family outside the family that really produced a lot of trauma in his childhood. And so when you talk about it's much seriouser, maybe darker, that's the nature, I think, of that. But that was the story choice that I think turned it back to your original question, tonally from something that might have been played for laughs to something that was, I think, more sincere.
I agree. And I think for me, the found family aspect was really interesting, how it tied into the metal community and how that, at least from the book, that community is why people are so invested in the music. What other stereotypes were you guys trying to work against? Or what other your favorite parts maybe in the novel that you felt like were important moments to kind of destigmatize that community?
Part of it is that, they're sort of a one-note Johnny. That the only thing about them is that they listen to this music. So I was talking to someone the other day. It's like, a lot of metalheads, when they get together at a club or at a music venue, if they're going to see a show play, they're talking about their taxes. They're talking about, if they're older, they're talking about healthcare. They have the same problems that everybody has. And so it was kind of treating them I call it a one-note Johnny. It would be very easy to just always have it be about this one passion that they share. But nobody's like that. So with Jack as an example, and this comes right out of my own experience, he loves rock and metal, but as you follow him, you learn that he studies symphonies, he studies scores from Broadway composers. He's actually a historian. He reads 5 books a month. Like, he's this voracious reader. He and Chewie grew up in an at-risk Chewie's his best friend, and they grew up in an at-risk program in West Los Angeles. It's sort of the product of gang families. And in that the at-risk program was in a library. So these kids, they read all the time. And so it became part of who they were. So they're very multi-dimensional. So it's that kind of thing. And it comes out naturally, hopefully, in the story. But it's not always just them getting around talking about Metallica.
No, definitely not. And I think it's more about giving every character in there has dimension and has a lot going on. And it's more like they found their friendship through the metal community, but that's not why they're friends.
To me, that's one of the things I love in all fiction. And I definitely was going to make sure wound up in this book is the idea of being people that you care about, being willing to stand in the breach with you, and you being willing to do the same for them. And that's not unique to to me or to contemporary fantasy, but it's something I care a lot about in storytelling. And so when I was in this idea of there's going to be a found family, I knew I wanted to write towards a moment where you would see these people who are this found family stand up in a unique way. And, they do it in song, which is, of course, appropriate. Yeah.
So what was the workload like between you and Brandon? It sounds like he had the kind of initial idea. It did feel, at least to me, that the magic system was very Sandersonian. So was that his, and then you did the line edits, or how did the work process go?
Yeah. So once we decided we were going to do it, the first thing that happened is Brandon did a draft of a World Bible. And then he sent that to me, and then we would iterate on it. So I would add some things, I would ask him some questions, and over the course of several weeks, that World Bible grew.
What does a Word Bible look like? Is it a Wikipedia online? Is it a document? Like, what is that?
It's
give me details.
It's a Word document.
Okay.
With there's a sort of table of contents, if you will, up front, but sections. And so there'd be a section about the factions of this world, the magic system, the characters, and there's probably 10 or 12 meaningful sections of it. I think at this point it's close to 50,000 words that is just the World Bible.
Okay.
Then there was, over the course of weeks and weeks of, months actually, of weekly calls, I was taking voracious notes of, the things that we would talk about. Sometimes they added to the Bible, and sometimes they added to what would become the series architecture for the books we wanted to write and the stories we wanted to tell. So we did that work first. Once we knew we had sort of a North Star on the series, we had a trilogy architecture for just the first trilogy. and then we did Brandon sent me a sort of bulleted outline. And I remember Brandon said, I think our World Bible's I would give it like a 9 on a scale of 10, because he's very, very big into rating things. He said, but I would give the outline I just shot you probably a 3.5.
Okay.
And I said, that's okay.
How long was the outline?
Oh, it's a couple of pages. It was
Okay,
literally
so
bullet points. Like I remember
short.
one says, there's a chase.
Okay.
I mean, obviously it wasn't all like that.
So we have like huge 50,000 words of World Bible and then 100-word outline.
Yeah, the outline was very sparse, but it was okay because what happened is I began to do the line-by-line writing, and then we would have these weekly calls where we would triage story questions. Like I'd write to something, and I'd want to be sure that we were aligned on the choice, and I'd say, well, here's what I did. What do you think? Sometimes he would say, oh, I probably would have solved that differently or this way. And so because I never wanted to be at odds, and Brandon, to his credit, never dictated like what things should be. He always wanted it to feel collaborative. We would find a third option. And so we just sort of wove our way forward that way until there was a draft. Then I sent the draft to him. He rewrote a few sections. He edited some sections. And then in the Word document, there would be like those comment bubbles.
Yeah.
Plenty of those. So I took that, I cleaned it up, did the revision. That went to the agent. The agent then, our agent is one of the down to the elbows, like going to have input on the story agents.
Okay.
And so we got notes, and I said to Brandon, I said, why don't you let me take care of these? Because, he's always like hip deep in 3 or 4 projects at once. And I understood what needed to be done. So I began to work on those. When that was done, what I did was I sent to Brandon like a really crisp, here's what changed. So when you go through this, you're welcome to read it all, but really just focus on these sections because everything else you've seen. So he did that. And then I went back and I did one last cleanse, and that's what went out to publishers.
Okay. When you were doing the line writing off this 3 out of 10 outline, did things change significantly in the outline? Did the World Bible end up changing?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So as an example, with the magic system, excuse me, Brandon had the idea of these catalysts, which are the tools of the trade. And nominally, it was a necromantic magic system. One of the things that evolved was, and I had this conversation with the publisher, was, I think when you say necromancy, it telegraphs something kind of specific. And I think, which is fine, but someone might think that the book they're going to get is a Dungeons and Dragons style thing, or, this sort of slightly evil guy raising the dead, and there'll be some set of zombies that can be commanded. And that really wasn't what we were doing. So I realized that term might send the wrong signal. The other thing was it was a much bigger magic system than just necromancy, and the mechanics of it were different. So one of the things where I brought some value, I think, to the magic system is really growing it. So what the catalyst actually did inside the magic system, additional catalysts to the magic system, growing additional components of the magic system, which is why we wound up with the term we call thaumaturgy, which has multiple sort of pillars of, cause and effect that can happen. And we haven't expressed them all yet, just some of them in book 1. So it certainly grounded in a very, what I think is original Sanderson style magic system, unlike anything that at least I've ever read. But he gave me a lot of room to grow it, from sort of the notion of catalysts like the lamp and the bow, the khopesh, to cut bindings and things like that, to something much bigger.
And maybe the music elements, because there's a lot of music elements.
And the music elements.
That I was guessing was maybe your influence on the magic system. Yeah,
Brandon did have this idea that the voice could be a catalyst to call to souls, and like call a soul in for a binding. You understand what that means.
Yeah, I know that. You guys, if you read it, you'll know what it means.
Then you'll know. Excuse me. So Brandon had that notionally. But as I was writing it, I developed a branch of thaumaturgy called shadowmancy, which has a lot to do with what can be perceived about a person in their shadow, so reflections of the soul. Then I began to riff on that, like what would that look like? Because it could have been quite abstract, and probably still worked functionally, but I wanted it to be more concrete. So one of the things you find is that people have a sort of signature for their identity and experience and memory that sometimes takes shape in the soul in a musical way, or at least with a symbology that a musician could understand and then potentially manipulate. So that I added all of that. And then, of course, Jack, because he has a certain unique ability with music, is able to do something with relationship to the sort of music representation of identity and memory in a shadow that makes him a very powerful and potentially dangerous person in this world.
Yeah, the shadow reading is what I was talking about, because that was my personal favorite manifestation of the magic system while I read, was the idea that you could peer into someone's soul through their shadow.
Yeah.
So I thought that might have been you, how it was. So I'm glad that I caught that.
That's a good insight.
But so this might be a hard question to ask or answer without spoilers. So try to do it the best you can. But was there anything big that changed on a revision? Like, what's the biggest thing that maybe you and Brandon didn't see eye to eye on that had to go through like quite a bit of work?
Yeah, there's a big one.
Okay. Can you talk about it?
I will talk about it. And then we'll see how much hot water I get in.
Okay.
When it went to the agent, Brandon had scoped out something he called factions and necromantic factions. Really cool. And I think in a lot of his books, he has a model like this, different groups that have different abilities. And there was very much that in this, and there still is. But the nature of what went to the agent was that the tension in the novel had to do with these different factions vying for power and land and stuff inside London, using the strata as a way to produce teams and semblances and vestiges that could, these are terms inside the world.
So should we explain? Do we need to explain any of the strata?
So in the strata is a series of eras of time that have aggregated below London. They're formed of memory of the residents there. And the residents are called semblances. It's like a soul. It's not exactly a soul. It's a soul that's not been able to move on to whatever next estate a soul would have. So it descends into the strata where it resides in the time that it lived in life. And from its memory, this primordial substance we call the endless dark creates a version of London. And these have accreted into layers of the past. There's one for modern, which is from today to like 1900, and then there's Victorian and Renaissance and medieval and Saxon and Roman. Anyway, I think there's 8 total. But in the strata, these semblances reside, and the Thanatists can descend. And they do that for a lot of reasons. And in the original architecture for the story, this had mostly to do with finding these semblances, binding them to a corpse in order to create like a servant, somebody who could fight for you or serve you in some way. And your ability to do that and to succeed in these fights and these quarrels, with the other factions was how you got power. I think that all worked great, but the agent was not a fan of it. He thought it was derivative. He said, I think maybe this idea has been done a lot. So what happened is we had to really recast that in a really major way. And I remember in the first draft, there was a character that Brandon didn't like at all. He was a journalist who had a little inkling about what was going on with this strata. And Brandon really didn't like this character, and so we cut him. But there was an idea nested inside that character that had to do with what I was getting at with the character is the notion of a tension between the past and the present. And so what I did, and this was a major change from what I got from the agent, was had to sort of recast the major conflict as a tension between the past and the present. So instead of like factions quarreling over land and resources, it became one of these faction leaders living in the strata who has this idea that he wants to create revolution to change the topside world, our world.
This is actually shocking me. So our main antagonist's main motivation wasn't in the original draft?
No, it was
Wow.
I think still was fun and interesting, but it was much more They were vying for land and authority inside the strata and topside world. And so, a lot of fun bickering and wars and fighting can eventuate, and the strata would still be a rich place to plumb. But what happened was when I started to lean in on this idea of the past and the present and what that tension looked like, I came up with the idea that what if it were true that the semblance is there? Their goal is still this idea of moving on to whatever next estate exists. They just need more time, right? They have unresolved issues. They have dreams that they didn't achieve, maybe grief that they've not dealt with, whatever their particular problem is that brought them into the strata. So their lives are incomplete, but they still strive for it. But what if what was happening was compromising their ability to do that? And so this villain, even though the way they want to accomplish this is not good, right? It's going to hurt a lot of people, is still a tenable argument, right?
That's why I called him antagonist instead of villain.
Yes,
right?
That's actually, that's a good distinction, because I think, while he's dastardly, you can understand his motivations.
Yeah.
And so then what happens is you realize that the topside world, our world, unwittingly, through marginalizing characters of the past or revising who they really were or simply forgetting who they were, these people that reside in the strata, you're foreclosing this opportunity for them. And so it's a very defensible reason that this guy's down there doing his thing. Mm-hmm. And Jack gets caught right at the nexus of all of this, because he's after the Iron Horse, which is the club where Jack and his friends spend their time, because it has a particular opportunity that will sort of catalyze this antagonist's plan, this revolution. And the revolution has a lot to do in the beginning with changing culture through music. It became a major change to the book and the series. Yeah. The first way would have worked, but the agent his feeling was what we were trying to do had been done enough. And so I spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out how I was going to recast this in a way that was unique, but still true to what Brandon and I had built. That was the hardest story problem that I grappled with.
Yeah, and I'm curious, did it trickle into the next two books?
100%.
I was going to say, did that mean you guys had to both go back to the outline in that World Bible? And
well, the good thing about where we were at with the World Bible and these sort of high level outlines for books 2 and 3 is they weren't very defined.
Okay.
So while some of it isn't going to work, a lot of it still does. There's one of the things you learn in book 1 is one of these factions. They're called schisms now. It's called the Sithons, and they have a certain arcanum that's really valuable and is mentioned a lot in book 1. And we had notionally this idea that maybe the Sithons aren't really gone. Mm. And so that all plays still in book 2, but with a sort of different result. So a lot of the planning still works because we hadn't got deep into the line by line of what those are. Yeah. But the consequence, I'm glad the agent pushed us, because I think the consequence is something far more unique than what we had.
And I'm curious at how it might have changed the trajectory of Jack's story, because I do think Jack's story is actually quite a push and pull between the past and present. And was that there before that change, or was it just heightened and supported by the change?
Mostly the latter. So what I found as I got into the writing is Jack had this traumatic past. Mm-hmm. And I suddenly realized that I could echo this idea of the past sort of having this tension with the present in Jack's inner arc. And so literally, as he's descending into the strata as a novice thanatist, it's pushing on these memories and forcing him to confront really, really painful things. And that grew organically out of the world we had. So for me, it was like a wonderful thing that happened without me having to force it. Mm-hmm. But what did happen is it put Jack on what in the book is called the forgiving path. And so as a unity for the trilogy, Jack kind of needs to remain on that path, because Jack makes a choice in this book after some hard-won stuff without
Yeah.
spoilers.
Yeah.
He makes a choice that actually sort of reverses some of the ground he gains. And you understand why he does it. You may even applaud that he did it, but hopefully you mourn that he loses this thing that he has worked so hard for. That's part of the forgiving path. And so
It's kind of a big moment in the book you lose.
it is, yeah. It's like I remember when I was writing that, like I was hoping that people would feel the loss of that, because Jack's been trying to earn that moment most of his life, and that forgiving path is a through line for the whole trilogy, because Jack has some forgiving he needs to do to feel whole. But it's going to be complicated for him. And so books 2 and 3 there's further explorations of what that looks like, but in different ways. And I'm a big fan, by the way, thematically, again, I don't write from theme, but I'm a big fan in fiction of the idea of forgiveness. Because I think that we are not as sufficiently enamored of forgiveness as a society. And so I love in my fiction when my characters work on that. And so Jack's working on it.
I think that's a great point to bring up, because I definitely had some problems in the book in terms of like, should you, Jack, forgive that person? But the novel really is about forgiveness. So I think that's fun when you can challenge your readers to decide, going on that journey maybe a little bit with them.
What's funny is, I don't know if you're thinking of the same part, but I remember Brandon, when he read a part where Jack does some forgiving, he goes, "That's not real." And I said, "That's from my own experience." Oh. I said, "That's real." He says, "That happened to you?" I said, "Yes." He said, "See, this is why we're collaborating." So
it probably was the same moment, because it sounds like it was.
And my readers, my early beta readers, like I had comments in the section saying, "Hell no." And I just thought, I understand, but like, and then one of the things that happened that I was able to sort of give it some traction in the book is I created the condition it was necessary for Jack to do this in order to accomplish something he needed to accomplish for the story to advance. So it still worked in my mind without it, because it is a real thing. And I know this because I've been there.
People are kinder, more forgiving. Good. Yeah. You can teach us about the forgiving path.
But yes, it's I gave it, I think, some a defensible reason, inside the book why he does it.
Yes.
But yes, so I'm, that's a Peter thing. Not, I just love when you in books you see characters willing to forgive other people, like real grievous offenses. I think that the best growth comes that way.
I love that theme. I always said it affected me a lot because I was feeling very emotionally invested about a couple of those moments. I would love to know what your favorite scene was to write, because I have a guess for maybe what it was, and I want to know if we align.
Yeah, but my favorite scene to write was Jack winds up at a moment in the book at Wembley Stadium.
Great.
And
that's what I predicted.
That's Brandon's favorite scene too.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, I may have told this story before, but it was Christmas time a few years ago, and Brandon had the book, and he was going through it, and he had just read that scene, and he texted me, and he said, "This is the reason we're collaborating, because I never could have written this scene." And it's not because Brandon's not like a world-class writer, but it's because I've been in that exact situation, been on a stage where everything's on the line. You're struggling with past to try and put everything you can into one performance. And the sounds and the way people look at you and the things you hear, like I've lived that. And that was why Brandon wanted to collaborate, because he knew I could bring that to the writing. And that scene is, it's funny too, because one of my editors, he really wanted me to contract that a lot. And I said, this is one where I'm just going to disregard all of your input, because I know I got this one right.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, one of the emotional bedrocks of the story is that scene. So I'm glad we didn't shorten it.
My editor, so I use an editor before I go to the publisher, but my editor and publisher at Saga, he said that one made me cry. So
you're like, ha, I didn't write
job accomplished, I guess.
Okay, so you said that music's a part of all of the stuff you've ever written, not just Songs of the Dead. So what are some of your other stuff that you've written, or your other series, or anything you want to
Yes.
Tell us about.
So I have an incomplete trilogy with Tor of epic fantasy. I owe them the third book. The reason that book's delayed.
Is it this one?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
I was like, is that the reason it's delayed?
Well, yes, it is.
Oh, okay.
That's why. So what happened is after the second book, it was not too long after that Brandon and I started our conversation. And like the nature of our collaboration has been many years in the making. The banging out the collaboration agreement took some time, because that needed to be right. And then Brandon's, he's busy, he's doing a million things. So between that and then my other work, so I have a trilogy with Tor that I need to finish. Music's a main factor there. There's a music magic system that I adore that's in that series.
What's it called?
The Vault of Heaven.
The Vault of Heaven, okay.
Yeah. 2 books out in that one. And interestingly, the third book is probably half written, but I sort of abandoned it because I wasn't going to turn past this opportunity.
Yeah.
Then what happened is, as Brandon and I were working through collaboration agreements and his calendar and the writing of this and the back and forth with the agents and all of those things, I got the opportunity to write a couple of novels, novelizing big concept albums by the Grammy Award-winning progressive metal band Dream Theater. I say it that way because I'm very proud of these novels. Dream Theater is my favorite group in the world, in all of my life. I adore their music. I've become good friends with the guys in the band. And I got the chance to take 2 of their wonderful, wonderful albums that tell these stories and novelize them. And so it's another moment where I'm marrying music and storytelling. So I did that like in parallel while all of this was sort of progressing slowly. And then the other thing that I think I may have mentioned, but I novelized the first record from Symphony North. And that's literally on submission right now. I have an editor who has intimated he's going to buy it. I should get that offer quite soon. And I'm like, I told you I'm a Christmas nerd. I adore everything in Christmas, from the tinsel to the reverential. And so I will write these stories. I have the second one all outlined. And that will be work I will do in parallel with this for the next 10 or 20 years.
I was going to say, the next decades of your life.
It's going to be a long time. But it's another place where, the stories germinate from musical ideas. But the novels, one of the things I like about transmedia storytelling is you can participate in any one element without having to participate in the others. So we have people come to our concerts who just love music. They're not readers. I have people who've read the Christmas novel who aren't ever going to listen to the music. But I think what happens is, for people who sort of dip their toe into the many different ways that it expresses itself, there are these wonderful resonances. Because with a novel, you can do more than you can do with a concert. But the concert has a certain emotional center that even a novel never will have. Because music, this is me sort of getting on a soapbox now, but music touches the soul in a way fiction can't. There's something about sound, right? It's a language that, especially in the absence of lyrics, like people can understand and enjoy together in a way that moves them similarly in the absence of the impediment sometimes of words that people interpret differently. So I love the language of music. And so, we have people that will come to the music that won't read the book, that will have a unique experience with the story. So I love that stuff. And that is where a lot of my energy will go when I'm not writing these novels. And we'll see how long it takes Tor to come after me for the third book in that trilogy.
Or your fans.
or my fans.
Who want it.
Because, one of the interesting things is when this thing got rolling, I had an interviewer like yourself come and want to talk to me. I said, great, let's set it up. And in the interim, he went and read my fantasies, those first 2 books. And he said, I don't know how come I never knew about these. These are wonderful. And I said, well, go tell my publisher to start publicizing those some more.
That's what this job is right here. There it is, the Vault of Heaven.
Yeah, the Vault of Heaven. Interesting thing happened with that is when the first book came out, my editor, there were a lot of things that happened that were a little bit unsavory, and he ended up being let go. And so Tor came back to me and said, would you be willing to do an author's edition? And they've only ever done that one other time. They did it for Orson Scott Card in a version of Ender's Game. They did an author's edition. And I said, of course. So they re-released my first book as an author's edition. So, so I would love to see them sort of, get energized around that so that I could finish it and maybe there's an audience for it. But the truth is I could be busy writing in the Strata Wars for quite a while, and I would be happy with that. It's so much fun to get to. I've had people who have begun to finish the arcs, So I'm getting a lot of DMs, people who are really enjoying like the music expression inside the book. So I think, that it's going to find an audience of people who dig that component of it. But the one thing I did want to say is, and I hope I am not repeating myself, but when we did this, we didn't want it to be like a gatekeepery type of thing. So we wrote it in a way that the music is not a barrier to understanding or enjoying the book. Excuse me. It would have been easy for me to get really deep on this stuff. And then, you'd have been lost and not understanding. So we kept it at an altitude where you may hear a band's name or a song invoked or something. It's not necessary for you to understand everything about it. I will say that the song choices are thoughtful. So if you ever go and read the lyrics, there's an extra meaning inside it. But you can't publish lyrics unless you get permissions. And so I never include lyrics.
I actually know a little bit about that because I read Armageddon Rag by George R. R. Martin. Clearly you know that book.
I know that book.
And I read a lot about what a nightmare that book ended up being because they have tons of lyrics in that book.
Yep.
And I actually was thinking that when I read this book, I was like, oh, he's listing song titles but never lyrics. And I bet it's because you can't do that.
George Martin said at one point, it's the book that almost killed his career.
Oh, yes. For many reasons. But that was partly it.
And so I knew you don't use lyrics.
Yeah.
I do at one point I come close because I have Chewie tell Jack at one point, sort of invoking a Queen lyric, "No Time for Losers."
Yes. But you kind of get around it.
I kind of get around it. But the point I want to make is it's not a book that if you're not a rock or metal listener, it's going to matter. The point really was this is a passion these people share, but they're really a family. And so, yes, there's a lot of cool music references. And by the way, it's not only rock and metal. I mean, as people, if they read it, they'll find out there's a lot of classical music in there. Henry Purcell is a character inside the book. Jazz is mentioned many times. I was in London a couple of weeks ago, and I got to go by Ronnie Scott's. He's a great, famous jazz musician from London. So there's a lot of music throughout the book because Jack's a music fan. It's not he's not just a metalhead, but he is a metalhead. And I think that hopefully you come out of it when you've read it and you feel like Jack's just a guy who's trying really hard to be a good friend.
100%. Yeah. And I'm a great audience member for that because I am not super steeped in the metal community at all. And I would say I knew most of the references. I feel like you kept it. I was thinking like, oh, they kept it nice for people like me.
Most
to be able to connect with it. Like I know.
Most of the band names, most of the song titles are familiar.
Yeah.
And then there's a few that are a little bit more obscure. So you know Jack knows his stuff.
Yes.
But that was intentional, And so I just put out a playlist on Spotify of songs that are mentioned in the book, and a lot of people are like, man, this is a sick playlist because it's got a lot of great songs in it.
What's the playlist called? I like giving my audience homework.
Songs of the Dead.
Oh, just Songs of the Dead.
Songs of the Dead, official Songs of the Dead playlist. It's on Spotify. I've had a bunch of people reach out and say, you need to do this on Apple and the other places. I don't have an Apple account, so I'm not sure if I can. I'll have to figure that out. But
that's what you make your publisher do.
I need to make the publisher do it.
Go tell them, get a discount.
But it was fun to, this is all comes natural to me. And I remember at one point I asked Brandon, hey, what does Jack look like to you? He says, well, he looks like you, of course. I said, oh, okay. So if there's not a lot of like navel gazing or, looking in the mirror. But there are a few places where you get a little bit of an idea of what Jack looks like. And he's not some teenage, rocker.
I also imagined you when I was reading Jack.
Did you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Jack's 33. So Jack's 33. Long dark hair. And but one of my great friends in high school was a Hispanic kid. We served in student government together. We were just great friends, and he's Chewy to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they all have their references,
for sure.
little inspirations.
That's what we do as writers. We like people watch.
Yes.
And they find their ways into
Take the little pieces of them and put them into everything.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down and talking to me about Songs of the Dead. I do like to give my watchers homework. So homework, Songs of the Dead is out as of yesterday. So congratulations.
Thank you.
You guys can go buy it and read it. Go listen to the playlist. That's going to be my homework. I'm excited. I didn't know. So I'm going to go listen to the playlist and give us one song. You mentioned you're so excited to be collaborating with
Dream Theater?
Dream Theater. I kept thinking Sound Booth for some reason. That is not it. Dream Theater, give us one song if we've never listened to any of them. What's the one song?
So can I give you two parts to that?
You're going to anyway.
Yeah. So they have a song called Pull Me Under,
okay,
which is referenced in the book. Jack's a Dream Theater fan. That was a big hit for them and broke them. And I think is a very accessible song, maybe a good gateway song for people who don't maybe listen to a lot of guitar music. Great vocalists, a lot of good hooks. So that's one. But there's a song that they wrote that is become the most important song in my life. It's called A Change of Seasons. The reason I hesitate is the song's 23 minutes long.
Okay.
So it's an epic. But the reason is it's telling you this story of mortality, like from young life to, it talks about this notion that we live on through our children. And, I battled some recent health concerns. And when I was going through that in some very dark moments, that song pulled me through because it sort of reminded me of what my priorities should be. And I've got a son, and there's a part of the refrain in the song talks about this guy who's going through these seasons of life and his son. And so that song, and it's got these beautiful movements that go from frenetic and just such amazing technical wizardry on the instruments to the most heartfelt, stripped down, vocally like painful and honest and beautiful sections in all of the music, rock and metal music I've ever heard, like my favorite. So I encourage people, like, if you really want to experience the full gamut, listen to A Change of Seasons. It will take you through all of the permutations of what I love about this music.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to do that. I encourage you guys to do it as well. And thank you for joining us, Peter.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.